A black family vanished in their new car in 1977. 20 years later, it was found buried vertically. This mysterious case landed on Detective Lena Morris's desk, not as a file, but as an impossibility. A highway survey crew in rural Georgia, performing routine geological tests, had found a car. This in itself was not unusual, but the car, a 1977 sedan, was buried 20 feet deep in the earth, its nose pointed down at the planet's core, a silent, vertical tombstone. It was a crime so bizarre, so logistical, it felt less like an act of human rage and more like a carefully constructed, taunting puzzle. And a puzzle of this magnitude, Detective Morris knew, required a master puzzle solver. Before I begin, thank you for watching. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Forensics Bay was a place accustomed to the grim aftermath of human tragedy. But the object that now sat in the center of the brightly lit room, resting on a massive steel platform, defied all precedent. It was a 1977 sedan, or what was left of it, a mangled, mud-encrusted shell, its original color barely visible beneath layers of rust and the stubborn red Georgia clay. Its shape was wrong, twisted from the immense pressure of the earth, a relic from a nightmare. For a week, Detective Lena Morris of the GBI's Cold Case Unit had been supervising the painstaking work. The discovery had been made by a state highway survey crew, their ground-penetrating radar detecting a massive, unnatural metallic object buried deep in the path of a new corridor project. The excavation that followed was surreal. They had unearthed not just a car, but a tomb, buried 20 feet deep, nose first, as if it had been dropped from the sky. Inside, they had found the skeletal remains of 4 individuals. Preliminary work and a check on the vehicle's VIN number provided a tragic identity: the Westmore family. Arthur Westmore, a respected black carpenter, his wife Eleanor, their 14-year-old daughter, Kimberly, and their 8-year-old son, Michael. A family who, on a summer Sunday in 1977, had driven their brand-new car off to a picnic and vanished from the face of the earth. The original 1977 police file from the local county sheriff was a joke, a testament to systemic neglect. It was barely a dozen pages long, contained a cursory missing persons report, and concluded with a dismissive suggestion from the then sheriff that the Westmores, a black family with a new car, had simply moved on to a new life without telling anyone. Now, 20 years later, the truth was horrifyingly clear. They had been executed and interred in the most bizarre manner imaginable. Detective Morris, a sharp, capable investigator in her early 40s, had the facts, but she had no logical entry point into the crime. The case was a perfect, sealed circle of impossibility. The sheer effort of the burial was staggering, requiring heavy excavation equipment and meticulous planning. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a construction project. But who had the motive and who had the means? The list of potential suspects from 1977 was clouded by time, faded memories, and the powerful social structures of a small southern county. Faced with this baffling puzzle, Morris made a decision that was considered highly unorthodox within the GBI. She decided to seek a consultation with a ghost from the Bureau's own past. A legend. A man who had retired years ago, but whose reputation for solving impossible crimes was still whispered in the hallways. She placed a call to a quiet, secluded home on the Georgia coast, a number she had to pull from the archives of retired personnel. The phone rang 3 times before it was answered. "Finch speaking," a quiet, precise voice said. "Mr. Finch," Morris began, her own voice formal. "My name is Detective Lena Morris. I apologize for the intrusion, sir. I'm the lead on the Westmore family case. The car that was found buried." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, broken only by the faint sound of classical music. "Ah, yes," the voice finally replied. "The vertical tomb. A fascinating geometric proposition. A problem of logistics and motive. I have been following the news reports. It is a puzzle of particular sensibilities." "It is, sir," Morris agreed, a wave of relief washing over her. "And I believe we need your particular sensibilities to solve it. Would you be willing to consult?" Another pause. "The puzzle pieces are old and covered in clay," Detective Finch said, "but the logic that connects them is timeless." "Very well. I will be there on Monday." The board was set. The pieces, long dormant, were now in play. Mr. Alastair Finch, the man who believed every crime was a solvable puzzle of human logic, was about to be drawn back into the game. Mr. Alastair Finch arrived at the GBI headquarters a week later. He was a man in his late 60s, slender and impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket despite the summer heat, his movements as precise and deliberate as his speech. He carried with him an air of quiet, academic authority, his sharp, intelligent eyes taking in every detail with an unnerving focus. He had been one of the GBI's first and most brilliant black detectives, a man who had navigated the treacherous racial politics of the 60s and 70s with a mind that cut through prejudice and incompetence like a surgeon's scalpel. His first request was not to see the evidence, but to meet with the sole survivor, Caleb Westmore. Caleb, now 39, flew back to Georgia, his heart a storm of conflicting emotions. He had waited 20 years for this, and now that it was here, he felt adrift. He met Mr. Finch and Detective Morris in the same quiet office. Finch did not offer platitudes or expressions of sympathy. He offered something far more valuable, his complete, undivided attention. "Mr. Westmore," Finch began, his voice soft but commanding, "I am not here to intrude upon your grief. I am here to understand a puzzle that began the day your family disappeared. You are the most important piece of that puzzle. I need you to take me back to 1977. Tell me everything, not just about the day they vanished, but about the weeks, the months leading up to it. Tell me about the town, the people, the unspoken rules." For hours, Caleb spoke. He talked about his father's pride, his mother's warmth, his sister's dreams, his brother's innocence. He spoke of the racial tensions in their small Georgia county, the quiet lines that were never crossed. And he spoke, with a bitterness that time had not dulled, of the Harrington family. He described the land dispute, his father's quiet determination to claim what was rightfully his, and the palpable sense of menace that surrounded the Harrington name. Finch listened, his fingers steepled, his eyes never leaving Caleb's face. He asked few questions, but they were incisive, probing. "Did your father have other rivals, Mr. Westmore? In business? In the community? Was there anyone else who might have wished him ill?" When Caleb had finished, his voice raw with the effort of reliving the past, Finch stood. "Thank you," he said simply. "You have provided the frame for our puzzle. Now, we must find the pieces." He declared to his surprised Detective Morris that to solve a 20-year-old crime, they must first resurrect the world of 1977. "We will treat this not as a cold case," Finch announced, "but as an active, present-day homicide. Every person with a significant connection to your family, Mr. Westmore, every individual with a potential motive, however slight, must be re-interviewed. We will assemble the cast of characters from that summer, and we will have them perform their parts for us once more." His plan was to create a closed circle of suspects, to draw them all out from the shadows of the past, and place them under the bright, uncomfortable light of a new investigation. The suspects, he outlined, fell into 4 distinct categories. The obvious suspects, the Harringtons Clayton and Merrill Harrington, who had a clear, powerful motive of a land dispute and the means to carry out the bizarre burial. The business rival, a man named Thomas Randall, a white businessman who, Caleb reluctantly recalled, had been in quiet competition with his father over a small but significant local carpentry contract. Randall had lost the contract to Arthur Westmore just a month before the family vanished. The secret admirer, a man named Walter Bishop, a seemingly harmless family friend who, it was whispered, had carried a deep, unrequited love for Caleb's mother, Eleanor. Could jealousy have driven him to a desperate act? The resentful relative, a distant cousin of Arthur's, a man named Silas Black, who had always believed he should have inherited the land and had openly expressed his bitterness. Each of these individuals, Detective Finch explained to Morris, had a reason, a motive, to wish the Westmore family harm. We will interview each of them. We will examine their lives in 1977. We will find their secrets. And somewhere, in their tapestry of lies and half-truths, we will find the single, illogical thread that, when pulled, will unravel the entire crime. The gathering of ghosts had begun. The reinvestigation into the Westmore family's disappearance began with a series of interviews that felt like seances, attempts to conjure the spirits of 1977 from the mists of time. Mr. Alastair Finch orchestrated them with the precision of a theater director, with Detective Lena Morris as his sharp, observant lead. Caleb, at his own insistence, watched each one from behind the one-way glass of the observation room, a silent witness to the dredging of his own past. First came Thomas Randall, the business rival. Now a portly, prosperous man in his late 60s, he exuded an air of aggrieved respectability. Arthur Westmore was a fine man, a good competitor, Randall stated, his voice smooth. Yes, we bid on the same county contract, and he won it fair and square. There were no hard feelings. I was at a church retreat in Savannah that entire weekend. My pastor, my wife, a dozen people can vouch for it. He presented a detailed, seemingly airtight alibi. But Finch, listening to the recording later, noted a subtle tell. Randall mentioned the specific make and model of the Westmore's new sedan, a detail that had not been widely publicized. How did he know? Next was Walter Bishop, the secret admirer. He was a frail man now, his hands trembling with age. He wept openly as he spoke of his deep affection for Eleanor Westmore. She was a saint, he whispered. I would never have harmed a hair on her head. I loved her. From a distance, always. He claimed he was at home that weekend, sick with the flu, a claim supported by a doctor's note he had miraculously kept. But in his statement, he spoke of Eleanor's unhappiness, of her feeling trapped, hinting at a marital strife that Caleb knew to be completely false. Was he simply a romantic creating a fantasy, or was he planting a seed of misdirection? Then came Silas Black, the resentful relative. He was a bitter, angry man whose life had been a series of failures. He did not hide his contempt. That land should have been mine, he spat. Arthur always got the lucky breaks. His alibi was weak. He claimed he was on a solo fishing trip with no one to verify it. He was a compelling suspect, full of motive and vitriol. But Finch noted something else. Black's anger was loud, performative. It lacked the cold, quiet cunning required for such a meticulous, silent crime. Finally, there were the Harringtons. Clayton and Merrill, now powerful men in their mid-40s, arrived with their high-priced lawyer. They were the picture of arrogant denial. Their alibi was the same as Randall's, the church retreat in Savannah. They were pillars of that same congregation. Morris conducted the interview, her questions sharp. She presented them with the evidence of the illegal dumping on the Westmore land. The lawyer dismissed it as a minor civil matter handled by their late father decades ago. She brought up the deathbed confession of Samuel Parrish, the field hand who had seen them at the site. The lawyer waved it away as inadmissible hearsay. Then Morris, following a line of questioning suggested by Finch, changed tack. This temporary waterline permit, she said, sliding the document Caleb had found across the table. Your signature or your father's, Mr. Harrington? Merrill glanced at it. His form, my stamp. Yet the check cleared from your personal account. Merrill offered a tight, condescending smile. Family share resources, detective. They were untouchable, their stories practiced, their legal armor impenetrable. They seemed like the most obvious culprits, yet they also had the most well-corroborated alibi, shared with another potential suspect. That evening, the investigative team was stumped. It's a web, Morris said, frustrated, pointing to the evidence board. Randall knows the car. Bishop is lying about Eleanor's marriage. Black has motive, but no alibi. The Harringtons have motive and means, but share an alibi with Randall. Everyone is lying about something. Caleb, watching them, felt a familiar despair. It was a hall of mirrors, designed to confuse, to exhaust, to make the truth impossible to find. But Mr. Finch was unperturbed. He had been quiet throughout the day, observing, listening. He now stood before the evidence board, not looking at the faces of the suspects, but at the photos of the car. "They are all lying," Detective Finch said softly. "And their lies are a distraction. We have been so focused on who these people are and what they say that we have neglected to ask the most important question." He tapped a forensic photo of the car's dashboard. "The puzzle is not in the people," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "The puzzle is in the car itself. They have all told us stories. But the car cannot lie. And it is telling us a story that contradicts them all." While Detective Morris and her team threw themselves into the frustrating work of trying to break the suspects' alibis, cross-referencing old hotel registries from Savannah, searching for church retreat attendees who might remember if Randall or the Harringtons had been present the entire time, Mr. Alastair Finch engaged in a different kind of investigation. He sequestered himself in a quiet office with nothing but the complete forensic reports and the high-resolution photographs taken of the Westmore family's car. He ignored the witness statements, the motives, the tapestry of lies. He focused only on the physical truth of the crime scene. Caleb found him there late one night, surrounded by photos laid out like a grim mosaic. Finch wasn't looking at the larger, horrific images, but at a series of detailed close-ups of the dashboard. "They think the key is in Savannah," Caleb said, the exhaustion evident in his voice. "But the Harringtons have a dozen people who will swear they were there." "People, Mr. Westmore," Finch said without looking up, "are the least reliable form of evidence. They misremember. They obfuscate. They lie. But numbers are pure. They have no agenda." He pointed a slender finger at one of the photographs. "Consider the odometer." Caleb looked. It was a close-up of the car's instrument panel, the numbers on the odometer frozen in time, coated in a thin layer of dried silt. 18.7. 18.7 miles, Finch said softly. "That is the distance recorded on this vehicle since it was purchased by your father. I took the liberty of checking the original bill of sale. It was brand new. It had 3 miles on it when he drove it off the lot." He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "So, in its short, tragic life, this car traveled a total of 15.7 miles. Caleb frowned, not yet grasping the significance. "Okay, so, Finch continued, his voice precise, "I also took the liberty of mapping the distances. From the car dealership to your family's home in 1977 was approximately 4 miles. From your home to the church you attended was about 2 miles. From your home to the grocery store, the post office. I have mapped every conceivable trip your family might have taken in the few days they owned that car. And then there's the final journey." He gestured to another map on the table. "From your home to the remote property your father inherited, the site where the car was found is approximately 12 miles. The total, Mr. Westmore, if one accounts for a trip to church and the final drive, comes to almost exactly 15.7 miles. A chill went down Caleb's spine. "You're saying the only place they ever drove that car was to church, and then to the place where they died?" "Precisely," Finch said. "There were no other trips. No joyrides. No visits to friends. The car's entire history is accounted for in that final, fatal journey." He then pointed to another photograph, this one of the fuel gauge, its needle stuck just a fraction below the F. And the fuel tank was full. They had filled it up that morning, ready for their Sunday drive. A full tank of gas to travel 12 miles. Finch now stood and began to pace, his movements deliberate, his mind clearly assembling the pieces of his puzzle. "Now, let us reconsider our suspects and their stories in light of these simple, immutable facts. Thomas Randall, Walter Bishop, Silas Black, their motives, their lies, they're all designed to make us look at them, to waste our time trying to prove or disprove their alibis. But they are red herrings. They're the background noise of a 40-year-old small-town drama." He turned to face Caleb directly. "The Harringtons, however, are a different matter. They, like Randall, claim to be at a church retreat in Savannah, 200 miles away. And yet, this car, the centerpiece of the crime, tells us a story that happens entirely within a 12-mile radius of your family's home. The crime is local, intensely local. So their alibi is a lie," Caleb said, his heart beginning to pound. A lie, yes, Finch agreed, but a well-constructed one, supported by other members of their powerful circle. Breaking it with testimony alone would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But we do not need to, because the car has told us something else, something far more damning. He picked up the final photograph. It was a close-up of the corroded metal where the license plate had been. The forensics team noted something interesting. The bolts holding the license plate were freshly scratched in 1977. Someone had recently removed it and put it back on. Caleb stared at him, confused. Why would they do that? An excellent question, Finch said, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. Why indeed? Perhaps to put it on another car for a short time? A decoy? No, too complicated. There is a simpler, more logical reason. Think, Mr. Westmore. Think like an architect. Think about the burial. He let the silence hang in the room. Caleb's mind raced, trying to see the connections, trying to follow Finch's thread of logic. A full tank of gas. Only 15 miles driven. A freshly remounted license plate. I didn't drive the car there, Caleb said slowly, a horrifying realization dawning on him. To the burial site. Exactly, Finch exclaimed, his voice sharp with satisfaction. The car was never driven to the grave. It was transported there, placed on a flatbed truck, most likely. It would explain the full tank of gas. It would explain the lack of any further mileage. And it explains the license plate. You cannot transport an unregistered vehicle, even a brand new one, without a temporary plate. So they would have removed your father's new plate, affixed a temporary transport tag for the journey, and then at the site, removed the temporary tag and reaffix your father's plate before burying it to ensure that if it were ever found, it would be correctly identified. He paused, letting the full weight of his deduction settle. This crime was not just a murder, Mr. Westmore. It was a construction project, a transportation and excavation project, a project that required specific equipment and logistical planning. He looked at Caleb, his eyes bright with a cold, clear light. And now, we know exactly who was in the construction business. 2 days later, Detective Lena Morris, acting on Mr. Alastair Finch's confident assertion that he had solved the case, summoned the primary figures to the GBI headquarters for what was described as a final clarifying meeting. The air in the large, sterile conference room was thick with tension. Clayton and Merrill Harrington sat at one end of the long table, flanked by their impassive lawyer. At the other end sat Thomas Randall, the business rival, Walter Bishop, the secret admirer, and Silas Black, the resentful relative, each looking bewildered and anxious. And at the head of the table, beside Detective Morris, sat Caleb Westmore, his face a mask of grim resolve. The door opened, and Mr. Finch entered, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. He did not sit. He stood before a large whiteboard, a single photograph of the vertically buried car projected onto it. "Thank you all for coming," Finch began, his voice calm, almost academic. "For 20 years, the disappearance of the Westmore family has been a mystery. Today, that mystery ends. We have spent the past weeks listening to stories, to alibis, to lies. But the truth was never in your words. It was in the earth. It was in the car." He turned first to Silas Black. "Mr. Black," he said, "you had motive. You believe the land should have been yours. And you had no alibi for that weekend. But this crime, this meticulous burial, required heavy machinery and careful planning. It was a crime of power and resources, not one of petty, opportunistic rage. You are a man of many resentments, but you are not the architect of this." Next, he addressed Walter Bishop. "Mr. Bishop, your affection for Mrs. Westmore was, it seems, genuine, if tragically misplaced. You lied about her being unhappy in her marriage, perhaps to create a narrative that might have seen her leave her husband, a fantasy you nurtured. Your secret was one of the heart, a sad, lonely secret. It was not one of violence." He then faced Thomas Randall. "Mr. Randall, you too lied. You told us you harbored no ill will towards Arthur Westmore over the lost contract. But financial records from 1977 show your business was on the brink of collapse, and losing that contract was a devastating blow. And you knew the specific make and model of the Westmore's new car, a detail you should not have known. Why? Because you saw it. You drove past their house that very Sunday, filled with professional jealousy, a fact you deliberately omitted. He paused. But like Mr. Black, you lacked the specific means and the audacity for such a grotesque burial. Your crime was one of envy, not murder. With a quiet, methodical precision, Finch had dismantled the red herrings, exposing their smaller, more human secrets while simultaneously clearing them of the greater crime. A palpable sense of relief and confusion filled one side of the room. On the other, the Harrington brothers sat, their faces impassive, their lawyer occasionally whispering in their ears. "Which leaves us," Finch said, turning his full attention to them. "With you, gentlemen." He walked slowly towards their end of the table. "You, like Mr. Randall, claim to be at a church retreat in Savannah, an alibi supported by a dozen of your influential friends. A formidable wall of silence, but a wall with a fatal crack." He pointed to the photo on the whiteboard. The car. The car is the crack in your wall. The odometer reads that it traveled a mere 15.7 miles in its entire existence. The distance from the dealership to the Westmore home, and from their home to the land where they were buried, accounts for every single one of those miles. The crime was entirely local. Your 200-mile trip to Savannah is an impossibility. The Harringtons' lawyers started to speak, but Finch held up a hand, silencing him. "You did not drive the car to its grave," Finch continued, his voice dropping, becoming more intense. "You transported it. On a flatbed truck, most likely from your own construction company's fleet. It would explain the full tank of gas. It would explain the lack of any further mileage. And it explains the license plate. You had to remove your father's plate, affix a temporary transport tag, and then reaffix the original plate before burying it to ensure it could be identified. A small mistake that left scratches on the bolts." He leaned forward, his eyes locking with Clayton Harrington's. "But there is one final, simple piece of logic that condemns you. The shell casing found in the car came from a .38 revolver. A revolver that, we have discovered, belonged to your most trusted and violent foreman, Jebediah Thorne. A man who died a year after the murders, taking his secrets with him. Or so you thought." He let the name hang in the air. For the first time, a flicker of something, fear, recognition, crossed Merrill Harrington's face. "You see," Finch said, his voice now a cold, sharp blade of accusation. "The puzzle is complete. The motive was the land and the illegal dumping my client's father discovered. The means were your construction equipment. The weapon was in your control. Your alibi is a lie, proven by the simple, unalterable numbers on the odometer. And your presence at the scene is confirmed by the deathbed confession of a man you terrorized into silence for 2 decades." He stood to his full height, his gaze sweeping over the two brothers. "There are no more questions. There are no more secrets." He turned to Detective Morris. "Detective," he said, his voice ringing with finality, "arrest these men." In the stunned silence of the room, Merrill Harrington, the younger, more polished brother, finally broke. A low, guttural sob escaped him, and he buried his face in his hands. Clayton stared ahead, his face a mask of stone, but his illusion of power had been shattered, dismantled piece by logical piece. The ghosts of 1977 had finally cornered their killers. The trial of Clayton and Merrill Harrington for the 1977 murders of the Westmore family was a landmark event, a public reckoning that put the county's entire history of racial injustice and corrupt power dynamics on display. The courtroom was packed every day, a tense, divided audience watching as the sins of the past were methodically unearthed. The Harrington brothers, their fortunes now spent on a team of elite defense lawyers, clung to their story. Their deceased father and his foreman, Jebediah Thorne, were the sole perpetrators. They were innocent sons, unaware of the dark dealings of their patriarch. But the chain of evidence Detective Lena Morris and her team had constructed, guided by Caleb's research and Mr. Alastair Finch's brilliant deductions, was too strong. The prosecution meticulously laid out their case. They presented the testimony of Samuel Parrish's daughter, recounting her father's deathbed confession. They presented the ballistics evidence, linking the shell casing found in the car to the revolver owned by the Harrington's foreman. They presented the waterline permit, proving a deliberate attempt to alter the crime scene. And Finch himself took the stand, not as a witness to the crime, but as an expert who walked the jury through the irrefutable logic of the odometer, the fuel tank, and the remounted license plate, the autopsy of the car, as he called it. The trial's climax came when the prosecution presented a final piece of evidence. It was the intricately carved wooden bird that Caleb had made for his father, found clutched in Arthur Westmore's hand. A forensic expert testified that microscopic analysis of the bird had found a tiny, embedded splinter of a specific, rare type of wood, the same wood used to make the custom grip of the .38 revolver owned by Jebediah Thorne. It was a one-in-a-million connection, a final, silent testimony from a father's loving grip, linking the weapon directly to the moment of the crime. The jury's guilty verdict was swift and unanimous. Clayton and Merrill Harrington were sentenced to life in prison, their masks of arrogant denial finally crumbling into pale, stunned disbelief. A week after the trial, Caleb Westmore sat with Mr. Alastair Finch on the veranda of a quiet coastal hotel, watching the gentle tide. "There's just one thing I still do not understand, Mr. Finch," Caleb said. "The wooden bird. Why was my father clutching it so tightly?" Mr. Finch, stirring his tea, looked out at the calm sea. "Because, my dear Mr. Westmore," he said softly, in his final moments, faced with an incomprehensible evil, your father did not reach for a weapon. He reached for a symbol of his son's love. It was not a clue for us, but a final message for himself. A reminder that even in the deepest darkness, there is something pure worth holding onto. For the first time in 20 years, Caleb felt a sense of peace that was not just about the cold satisfaction of justice, but about the enduring warmth of grace.